When I first started making this little video going over the birth certificate, I made some statements with regards to what the Vital Statistics Act said, and then after reviewing it, occurred to me that I hadn't looked at the Vital Statistics Act for years, and I have decided to do a quick review of the Vital Statistics Act just to show you that these acts are always changing, and what you remember an act says, A, it could have been changed, and B, it's easy to mix up the various acts and which one said which. So I went online and got a copy of the most recent version of the Vital Statistics Act, which is this one here. And I got an archived one off of my hard drive from 1997. So this was actually the first time I was looking at the Vital Statistics Act and did research into what it said and what the requirements were and so on. So very quickly, again, it's very good to refresh yourself in terms of the acts. Not necessarily that they do apply to you, and one of the points for actually studying acts is to find out how they do not apply to you, so you can actually come to the belief and understanding that they do not apply to you. And when people say that they do, you have an understanding of how they do not, instead of having no reply, which is usually what happens. So this is the latest version of the Vital Statistics Act that I just downloaded. It's a PDF. These are hot links to the specific sections. And I've just highlighted some stuff that I'm going to go through. And an interesting aspect of the definitions and how they work in terms of statute construction is the definitions within a particular act apply to that act only. So they're taking words and they're creating either a new definition or an extended definition for the purposes of that act only. So I've highlighted a few things throughout the act of interest. The first one that caught my eye was definition of birth, and the fact that if you forget about the extraneous stuff, birth is a product of conception. Okay, so whatever comes out is a product of conception. And that's an interesting turn of phrase instead of baby, child, body, whatever. A product of conception. It sounds pretty neutral. I actually recently heard somebody speaking with regards to the drug acts and how the drug companies get away with selling these chemical drugs which kill a whole lot of people. And that the way that they get away with it is that the drugs have been approved for use on animals, and the definition of the of people within statutes has been neutralized to the point where they're effectively animals, and therefore they get around the liability issues because of being redefined as animals, which is a I've seen some of the research on it, and it looks like there's some potential stuff there, and I'll address that in the future. But when you look at the actual birth definitions, and it's a product of conception is what is born, it's so neutral you don't know what it is. And as long as it's breathing, has a beating heart, a pulsation of umbilical cord, or unmistakable movement of voluntary muscle, it's considered a birth, and that is just a product of conception. And then when you go into the other aspects of this act, because this act is vital statistics, it deals with births, deaths, and marriages. So when you look at a burial permit, they're using the term dead human body. So there's a reference to a body, and you reference to the fact it's a human body. But when you go to a funeral director, again, dead human body. When you go to a stillbirth, you're talking about back to a product of conception. And they also reference, with regards to the dead body, here it is, crematorium. Okay, crematorium, human remains. Not a dead human body, but human remains. And cremation, they use another definition of a dead body, neutralized again, not specifically human. So why all the different references to dead human body, human remains that are, somewhat different, especially when the initiating thing is a product of conception. So I just found that interesting. And with regards to the application of this act, it does apply to specific persons. And you got to go way down to the end of the act here to application of the act. There it is, application of the act, section 47. This act applies in respect of birth, stillbirth, marriage, death, dissolution, or annulment of marriage, adoption or change of name that occurred before the passing of the act, as well as to birth, stillbirth, marriage, adoption, or change of act that may occur subsequent to the passing of the act. So the application of the act section is only applicable to time, and it doesn't refer to persons or people or who has to perform under it. So there's, in many cases, it's referred to all persons or something like that, but there's no reference to all persons. So who has to actually perform under this act? And if you go to the definitions here, one of the definitions is a midwife. It means a person who is registered as a member of the College of Midwives of British Columbia, which means that only the registered persons who are registered midwives are subject to performance under this act. If you're not a midwife, if you are a midwife, but you're not registered under the College of Midwives, you're not subject to the act when they refer to midwives. You're a different type of person in law. The other one I found interesting was Chief Executive Officer, meaning the Chief Executive Officer of Vital Statistics. It's referred to throughout the document. Chief Executive Officer can do this, that, and the other thing. And Chief Executive Officer is a purely corporate title, and obviously has some interesting corporate structure connotations to it. So who has a duty to give notice of births? Well, each medical practitioner or midwife who attends at a birth must give notice. Does it say you first or the medical practitioner first and midwife? If no medical practitioner or midwife attends birth, it's the nurse or other person who attends that must give notice of the birth. So the nurse is, some type of employee of the state probably in most cases, because you're talking about hospitals, and if none of them do it, then it's the hospital who's responsible. So each one of these people have a responsibility, and if they don't do it, then it's the responsibility of the hospital. And if notice of a birth is given under Section 3, which is the hospital doing it, then Section 1 and 2 people, practitioner, midwife, and nurse, does not apply. They no longer have a requirement. So effectively they're saying the hospital has the ultimate responsibility to give notice of the birth. But the practitioner, midwife, and nurse can all give notification, and if none of them do, it's the duty of the hospital. That is within 48 hours of the date of the birth that one of these parties, ultimately falling on the shoulders of the hospital, because they are under the Hospital Act, they are required to comply. There is also the further requirement for reporting of a birth, which is different than notice, giving notice of the birth within 30 days by the mother and the father. And if it's just a mother with no father, there's a reporting requirement there. So they must complete and deliver to the Chief Executive Officer a statement in the form required by the Chief Executive Officer respecting the birth, which I'm assuming is the birth registration document. If no person referred in subsection 1 delivers a statement, the Chief Executive Officer may prepare the statement with the information provided in the notice of birth received under Section 2. So if you don't do it, they get to use the notice of birth from the hospital to do it. That's effectively what that's saying there. If the statement is made by a person under subsection 1C or D, which is, here's 1, C or D, child's father, so there's no mother on it, or there's neither parent is capable, so it's lacking a mother reporting on it, then the person making the statement must make and submit with the statement an affidavit setting out the facts that require the statement to be made by the declarant. So missing the mother on here is important, and there's got to be additional information about it. Statement must contain particulars of mother and, if the father makes a statement, particulars of the father. If a statement completed by only one parent of the child, the Chief Executive Officer must alter the birth registration on application of any of the following persons. So if just the mother has, or one person, or not the parents have made the notice, then the Chief Executive Officer must alter the registration of birth if any of these people then apply after the registration and they get put on the registration. So there is the opportunity to alter the document, and this Chief Executive Officer must do so when other people come to claim the registration of that birth. Now the name of the child, they refer to a surname, which is different than the family name. And that's what they're trying to transition you in from, the common law family name to the surname. And if we scroll down to something else, birth registration within 1 year. All right. So they want 30 days, but if you don't do it within 1 year, then the chief executive officer must register the birth if satisfied of the truth and sufficiency of the statement made within a year by the party registering. So if you don't do it within 30 days, you can do it within 1 year. Oh, and look, if you don't do it within 1 year, you can do it after 1 year. And they must register the birth. So how mandatory to do it within 30 days is it if you can do it within 1 year? You can do it after 1 year. And there's no penalties associated with you not doing it at all, or within those time frames. There's nowhere within the Act with regards to penalties for not doing so. You are applying for registration of a birth. You are applying for it. You're asking them to do it. And a lot of people have some insight on application and what that all means. Alteration of or addition of given names. So once the child's been registered, you can alter the names. And there's processes for stillbirths and adoption and every aspect of the birthing process. And then they get into registration of marriages. Again, the registration of marriage is kind of like registration of birth. It's the people who are licensed. In this case, the person who is licensed to solemnize must be registered. They have the obligation to register because they're the ones with the license. All right, so the person who solemnized the marriage must provide the chief executive officer with a statement completed. They have the obligation to do it because they're in the system with their license. And if it's not registered in 1 year, guess what? You can do it after that. What an interesting thing. So much for mandatory must do it now type of stuff. Correction for errors and omissions, there's allowances for that. Vital Statistic Agency must be a vital statistic agency in the minister's ministry. The chief executive officer must be appointed under the Public Service Act, so they are public servants, I would assume, and therefore have oaths of performance, which is good to know. It would be good to check on that as well. Vital Statistic Registrar, so this is a particular position. There is the CEO, and then there is the registrar, and they have their own specific duties as well. Information on certificates, death certificates, marriage certificates, certificates in general, who can issue, cancellation, information sharing agreements, how they can go and take all this information and sell it or give it to other agencies of the government and so on and so forth. And down here, let's see, confidential information, how it's protected from being shared. Application of the Act, went over that. This is the other thing, failure to carry out duties. A person who fails to give notice or to furnish any statement, certificate, or particulars required under this Act within the time limited by this Act commits an offense and is liable on conviction to a fine of not more than $50,000. If more than one person is required to give notice or to register or to furnish any statement, certificate, or particulars required under this Act, and the duty is carried out by any of those persons, the other or others are absolved from the performance of that duty. So any person, okay, keyword person, any person who fails to give notice or to furnish any statements, well, all the licensed people are and the hospital is, but you may not be a person because you're not under the Act as a private person. And so they have the duty to perform under that Act. See, required under this Act. The persons are required under this Act to perform those actions. Otherwise, they are subject to it. And if one person who's required to give notice or register does it, the other persons are absolved. So if you have an obligation and they fulfill it, then you're absolved of any liability to fulfill it as well. So it seems to be that the hospital is going to do it no matter what, from the sounds of it, and you don't have the duty to do it once they've gone ahead and done it in your place. They are accountable for having to do it anyways. Power to make regulations, providing for the registration of births, stillbirths, marriages, deaths, adoptions, or change of name in cases not otherwise provided for this Act. Again, Acts are limited, and you have to look at what the permissions are under the Act. That's a real quick review of the Vital Statistics Act, which is in its present state, and the Vital Statistics Act from 1997. Many of the things are the same, but there's also some very interesting changes as well. The same issues with regards to definitions. There is this definition, which is no longer in the definition section, means unable because of death, illness, absence from British Columbia, or otherwise. Absence from British Columbia. Interesting. Oh, and this given name includes Christian names, so they're trying to bring over. International classification is no longer in the Act, and it was associated with the World Health Organization, so that's been removed. And the definition of stillbirth is different in the new Act from the old one. They were more specific with regards to size of what came out, but in this case, it's anything that comes out is considered a birth. The duty to notice is very much the same, although it's a little more extended in the new version. And I'll be posting both of these versions on the website so you can download and look at it and make comparisons. But there's a number of things which are different in here of interest. Just looking for the highlights. Oh, here's something that was removed: filing of church records. They actually addressed church records being available to be filed in the previous edition, but no longer. So that's been removed for some reason. The difference at the time here, there was a Ministry of Health and Division of Vital Statistics, which is no longer. It's now a Vital Statistics Agency. So again, this indicates part of the change from a department to an agency. Registration districts is not mentioned in the new version. For purposes of this Act, British Columbia is divided into registration districts. Those are no longer referenced in the new Act. Certificate as evidence. I didn't see this in the new Act either. A certificate purporting to be issued under these sections is admissible in any court in British Columbia as evidence of the facts certified to be recorded. And it's interesting. Many people talk about the fact that your birth date, the knowledge of your birth date, is hearsay. You were told what your birth date is, and there's a birth certificate that you've been issued, but you have no personal knowledge of it. What they're, I believe, saying here is that if you bring the birth certificate in, it is admissible as evidence of the fact that the birth date occurred on a specific date. Another thing to consider with regards to that position. Failure to carry out duties has changed. They put up to $50,000 fine in the new Act, and they did not have it in the previous Act. This is actually in both Acts. I didn't mention in the first one. Prohibition against other registration systems. A system of registration of births, deaths, and marriages must not be maintained or continued in British Columbia other than as authorized by this Act. So they don't want anybody else running a registration system. This is another interesting thing which was removed. Power to make regulations. There are regulations associated with the Act. There's always an Act, and very often there's regulations associated with it. Within the regulations, there was a requirement for schools to report the children who were registered with specific information. And here is, in this old version, power to make regulation referencing that, which is now gone from the new version of the Act. It requires persons in charge of schools in designated areas of British Columbia to prepare and deliver to the director returns respecting the names, dates, and places of birth of children enrolled in those schools. That was a requirement in the past. It is no longer a requirement under that Act. I wonder if it's been moved to another Act, but it's not under this one anymore. So that's a quick look at how to look at the various Acts and read through them and find some interesting things. It is important to reference the regulations as well as the Act, and not look at just the Act and regulation in isolation. Make sure if there are regulations, you review that information as well.